Perfect. So what we're going to be covering today is our CRUD actions for our shoes lab. And so we've started last time and we've got this great application. I'm going to share this out with you guys again, just in case any of you missed it last time, if you joined late. This is the repo we're going to be working with. If you want to navigate to what we did, like if you're like, I only want to look at the first section, you can always go, I'm going to not delete the branches once I've merged them. So you can go over to this January 22nd branch, and when you click on it, then you'll see the code as it was just on January 22nd. There will be another one for today. So you can kind of see it in stages as we progress is the end goal. But so getting started and looking at what we're dealing with today, we want to be able to create shoes. We've already figured out reading shoes, so we can kind of skip the R action of CRUD. And then we also want to make sure we can update and delete. And so let's go ahead and get our server running. Why can I not type today? Just so we can see what we've got. And then we're going to talk through how we actually start making the create action. So quick brainstorm from you guys. We're just going to write in some notes. What are some pieces, there are not really any wrong answers here, that we are going to need to add to our app if we want to create shoes? There's lots of files we're going to have to touch, lots of pieces we're going to have to add. Throw out anything in there that you're like, I know if we're going to create shoes, we need this. What do you think? Oh, also, side note, while you guys are thinking, I added some things to the database, and I realized that when I'm on a different branch, it adds to the database, even though it doesn't update my changes. And if you guys remember in our model, we left 2 ways of writing out that brand and color, and we were like, oh, this is the better one because it looks neater. Well, turns out this is actually the better one because this one doesn't break if someone doesn't have a color input. This one does break because if self.color is nil, it's trying to add nil to a string, which it can't do. So when I added some, we have some bad data in the database. That's why it's being like that. You can see I've got a few that don't have issues. Okay, so let's go back to our brainstorm after that little side note. So we'll go, coming back to routes, I see a lot of things that we need here. So we're going to need a new and create method. Jesse, can you clarify when you say that, where would the new and create method go? And we need a view with a form.
We would need those in the controller.
Perfect. Really, typing is a struggle for me today. So these are the main pieces that we need. So because we happen to be in the routes file, let's start with our routes. And because we are doing a route that is going to be shoes/new, it is important that it goes above this one. So we'll go ahead and first I want to write out the route that is going to display the form to me. Should that be a get or a post request?
Get.
Perfect, thank you. Also, just as a side note for Zoom, you can always hit the space bar to unmute yourself as like a really quick way if you're like, oh, I just want to shout out this one answer. So we'll make a get request that goes to shoes/new so we can see that form. This is not going to build our shoes for us, but it will be where we have the form for them to fill out information. And then we'll send them to the shoes controller where we will send them to the new method that we are going to go ahead and create. We could add an as. I actually am not sure off the top of my head if we need one or if it will do it for us. So let's go to Rails info routes and see if we now have a path. Yeah, so it did it for us. We have a new path helper if we want to link to this place. Okay, that looks good. What is the other route that we will need in order to get our form to work?
Post.
Yeah, we got to send that form somewhere. Anytime you make a form, you want to have a matching post. And RESTfully, if we were to look at our Rails conventions, what's the convention for the URL for this route?
I think it would be that we would post to /shoes.
You're absolutely correct. And we are getting to a point where we have enough routes, it might make sense for us to use resources instead of writing them all out by hand. If we were to use resources, I would do it underneath this custom route to make sure that it still didn't interfere with the ID. But it's neither here nor there. We'll finish writing this one out, and then we might switch it just to resources, because we're going to have a lot more routes to add today. And then this will go to our create action. This does not get a new as, and the reason it doesn't get a new as is because it's the same. The path helpers are only generating the URL. They're not generating anything that has to do with the action that it's going to. They're not even generating anything that has to do with the method. Our path helpers just generate the URL. So technically, we already have a path helper to help us with this one, and we could use that path helper as long as we change the method to post. And so this path helper technically applies to more than one route, because in both cases, shoes path is just a fancy way of saying quotes / shoes. That's all it is. And so it works for both situations. So because we are where we are at the moment, let's take a second and we're gonna just clean this up. I'm gonna comment these out because I actually do think it is really helpful just to see the routes if you wanna go back and look at how do you do them that way. But we're gonna switch to resources because that makes the most sense. Something catch me on that. Is there an S there?
I don't know, but I had a problem with this earlier, which is I noticed that when I switched between writing the routes by hand and using resources, the names of the paths actually changed, and I'm not sure why. But for the new path, it used to be called shoes new path when I wrote it out by hand, and then when I used resources, it was called new shoe path.
I was actually thinking that this was a little bit backwards than what I was used to seeing, but I was like, maybe I'm just remembering it wrong. So I think, yeah, resources just does that one a little bit opposite than what we would expect. So good to know. Maybe what we should have really done is to keep it the exact same as new shoe, because then we wouldn't have had to mess with any changes. But that's a good point. If otherwise that path helper will change. And so let's specify we only want index, show, new, and create for the moment. And let's refresh this and make sure we haven't broken our routes. I can't tell if it's done loading. I think it is. And we got new shoe path. It all looks good. We keep our custom one up top because otherwise our custom one would have to be the last one. And if it's the last one, it would hit shoes ID first. Okay, those look good. So let's go ahead and navigate to that new path that we are trying to make, shoes / new. And we should hit an error message, but love Rails error messages. They direct us as to what we should do next. So we'll go to the shoes controller and we will make a new. It also doesn't really matter the order you put these in. I just tend to keep new to the top, but it's not going to matter that much. We will need a create, and I'm a big fan of just, these in my mind are pairs. So when I write one, I tend to write the other one. Otherwise, I might forget about it later, and so it's just easier for me to do them both at once. For now, we aren't going to do anything with this, but we might come back to it. Now for views, do I need a view for both my new and create action? You can just give me a yes or no.
Just new.
Yes. And why don't I need one for create?
Because you're not rendering anything when you do that?
Yeah. Any of your post requests, you should not need a view to match. And I think most of you guys have figured that out by now, but I just like to emphasize it. Some of the questions I ask you, I know might be a little bit of review, but I think it's just important to emphasize a few of those concepts. So create a new shoe here. Our hope would be that we can just see that view. I always just make sure that everything connects before I do anything crazy. So I'm more likely to cause an error or a syntax error when I make a form. So I always just try to make sure some text appears before I start actually doing the bulk of my work. Okay. So this is where our bulk of our work is going to happen today, because once we have this done, our edit is going to be super simple, and then our delete shouldn't take that much either. And the way I want to build this out is very similar to how we dealt with our links yesterday. It is really important to me that you guys understand that all of these helpers in Rails are purely making HTML. So we're gonna start the long form way, and I know your labs kind of made you do this. We'll go through it pretty quickly, but if you can put on your Sinatra brain for a second, or if there's anyone in this study group that maybe hasn't started on Rails yet, you could guide me. If I was in Sinatra and I was to write a form, how would I start? It's hard to think.
The form, you need a form tag, and it has two attributes. It has a method and an action, and the action is like the URL you want to go to, and then the method is like what kind of requests you want to send. So yeah, post in this case.
Perfect.
You need some like input tags.
Yeah, we're gonna need some old HTML, so we know for sure we'll need a submit, and submit uses the value instead of a name, so we'll call it create shoe. And then we'll also, maybe I'll add a label. And for right now, for the comparison, I'm only gonna make a brand field, but then we'll go back and we'll add the other fields. But just so we can see our comparison, we're gonna keep it really simple. So a brand, we can do like a type text, and it is best practice to namespace, and we really wanted you to namespace in Sinatra as well. Whether or not you did it was up to you, but so I'll go ahead and write it namespace so that our params are a little bit neater. This will give me a form on the page. Will this form be able to submit? Should we just try it?
No, it won't.
No, it will not. And why will it not?
Your create method in your controller doesn't do anything right now.
Okay, so good point. Create does nothing, but there's also another reason it won't work.
We don't have a post route to shoot.
Authenticity token?
Okay, we got lots of good things happening here. So we did actually sneak in that post route. I did add in the create action here, so we do have the post route, but that would be a good call, and a lot of times that can be something that's missing. Is correct, we're doing literally nothing here, so nothing's gonna happen yet, but we have a bigger issue, and that is that Rails is a step up from Sinatra in their security, because Rails is like a lot more mainstream in its use, and so there's a built-in check that they want to make sure that the request from your site is coming from your site and not coming from another site. And so because of that, your Rails application has a unique authenticity token, and every time it sends a request, it must send that unique authenticity token to prove that the request came from this site and that you didn't get a hacker request from another site. And so it's just a layer of protection. We can write out that layer of protection in this bland form, and I'm going to actually copy and paste the text in because it's a lot to write. But basically, we can add in like a hidden authenticity token, and then this will allow us to submit. It's not going to really do anything, but it would allow us to submit. And if we inspect the page and take a look at it, we will now have this authenticity token with a crazy long value that will allow us at least to submit. Yes, our create's not doing anything yet, but we'll get there. Cool, so that looks pretty good. Actually, why don't we go ahead and we're gonna add more to this form, but how would we handle the create? Let's go ahead and we can create a shoe here. So I want to create a shoe. What would be my, we're not going to do any sort of checks. We're just going to create it. What's my active record command that I can do? So Kazito, your command works perfect if we're going to do some checks. A lot of times, actually, I tell people to start with new, but in this case, we're just going to go straight to creating. So we'll use shoe.create. And then you might have seen something a little bit different, but we have to process our params a bit differently in here as well. And the reason we do it is we do it so that we can have, well, let's see what happens if we just do params shoe. And let's put a binding pri. and we'll say Nike too, just because we already have a lot of Nike shoes. Oh, no. I really thought I had pry in here. That's a bummer. I have buy bug, but I don't really like buy bug. For now, we'll use buy bug because I don't want to have to restart all of that. Buy bug is like the same as pry. You just write buy bug instead of pry. And actually, I don't even need it because when it errored right here, I'm now in a pry. So we'll just type shoe to see what we got. Let's look at our params shoe. Look at our params. None of our params come through? Ah, so when you guys look at this here, we did get our params, a brand pointing to Nike, but when I do params shoe, I get nothing. What if I do params? Maybe it's because I did it as a symbol. Still nothing. Why do I get nil here when I can see clearly I have a param shoes? And if I'll make this a little bit bigger because there's a lot of useful information down there that I don't know if you guys can see. And I don't know if you guys might not have read about this yet, so I could be introducing something new and could just explain it.
It's called shoes in the hash.
Shoes, right?
Oh, yeah. I was, oh my gosh. Yes. What I was really, man, I can't believe that was actually not what I was trying to get at, but this is what I expected to see. I didn't expect nil, and I was like, oh, maybe it's doing the work for me. Sorry guys, I have not gotten a lot of sleep the past 2 nights. So in looking at this, we do get the params coming through, but they are considered permitted false. So let's see, let's just see what happens if I go params and we do it the right way, shoes with the S. It doesn't actually let us create the shoe. This is what I was trying to show, is that it will not let us create the shoe because, like I said, Rails has extra protections. So not only does it protect to make sure our site isn't making a fake request, but it also protects to make sure that our params are the ones that we want. And you might be sitting there thinking like, well, if we made the form, of course the params are what we want. But it is super, super easy for HTML to be manipulated. So let's say I wanted someone to be able to type in the brand, but I didn't want them to be able to type in the condition. Like maybe this was a place where like they dropped off their shoes and I was gonna inspect the condition. Well, they could come in here and they can actually, you can always add HTML. So I can, why is it not letting me click there? And I can, well, I'll just edit this one. I could change this, instead of it being shoes brand, I could change it to be shoes condition. And all of a sudden I've changed what my params are passed through. So it's really important that on the back end, we are actually protecting and saying, these are the only params that someone can submit. I don't want them to be able to edit their ID in the database. I don't want them to be able to edit their bank account balance. I want them to be able to submit checks for deposit, but they shouldn't be able to like hack in and change their bank account amount. So we control what params are accepted, and there's a certain format or way that we do that. And the way it looks is a little bit like this. We use a term where we are requiring the object model or what we've nested it. So we nested our param, so it's shoes pointing to brand. So we will require shoes, which means all of those things must be under shoes, and then we will permit any of the attributes that's a shoe attribute we're okay with. So we're gonna be okay with any of them. So we would list shoe, we would list brand, condition, price, and color. And this would allow all 4 of those parameters to come through. And so I can even show you guys right now. Oh, we're not still in the pry, are we? If we were still in the pry, this would now work. And actually we can do it right here. If I go ahead and create it, we will now create a new shoe. but it's in our bybug. And this time we did have a shoe because those params were permitted. This is a thing that's a lot of people, it's a really easy thing to miss. If you're looking at your code and you go, everything is perfect, why is it not going through? Double check your params, and you can look to see if your params are permitted as true or permitted as false. This does have a permitted false, which is odd because we've got those in there. Let's write them as this. Unpermitted parameter condition. Oh, I spelled condition wrong. that would do it. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense now why that wasn't working. I was like, we should get permitted true. If you see permitted false, something is wrong here. Maybe you had a typo, or maybe you left off an attribute that you added later on. So it's just a good thing to keep in mind as you're going through here. Okay, so let's jump back to the form. Actually, that's a big concept and is kind of confusing. Does anyone have questions about that?
I have a question, Jen. Is this only for when you're creating something new that you would need to require this?
Wonderful question, Anna. And no, it is actually also going to be required for updating. And the reason it's for both is kind of the same reason. When we update, we wouldn't want to be able to sneak in changing our ID in the database or changing our bank account or some of that sensitive information that we shouldn't be allowed to mess with in the database, because this create is going to interact directly with the database. So we just want to have extra protections against that. And what you will see, and we will get there, is when we do this with the update, we'll now have it twice. And because we have it twice, we'll actually make it a helper method because it'll be code that's reusable. But for right now, we'll leave it here. So let's go back to our form. Great question though. And we're gonna take this up a notch. This is a lot of HTML, and a big part of Rails is so we can move away from writing HTML and move away to the Ruby code that we love and know. So we're gonna jump to making a form tag. And I know I have a few of you guys in here who have made form tags, and so I'm gonna add some breaks so that we can write our form tag down here. A form tag is just a Ruby helper method, or a Ruby Rails helper, not Ruby, that is going to transform Ruby code into HTML for us. I'm going to show you that we'll actually, in writing a form tag, end up with the exact same thing we have up here, but we'll be writing it in a way that takes a little bit less work from us. One of the reasons it takes a little bit less work is any of those Rails form helpers will include the authenticity token for you. So it's like a built-in, they know you need it, so they include it, and you don't have to write that line of code. So it'll save us a little bit. So when we write a form tag, we start like this, and a form tag accepts an argument. It's going to accept an argument of wherever we're sending our code. We could write this as, actually we could write it as the shoes path, because that should just formulate into a slash shoes HTML. We could also write it as shoes. But because we're trying to get to more Ruby code, let's write it as shoes path. And then we will end it before we write anything so we don't mess anything up. Do notice that this form tag at the top does need an equals because we want to actually display the form tags. The user won't see something that says form tag, but we want to make sure it's actually displaying like the form action equals. So if we just refresh that, we won't see anything new here, but we should see something new inside of our, unless this is like frozen. Oh, it is frozen because it was in bybug. We should see something new in here. We'll see, there's our first form action. Oh, maybe it won't show us unless we put anything inside of it. Okay, I was wrong about that. We have to add a little bit more or it won't show us anything. So we will add inside of here. We'll start the same way. We'll start with a submit tag. And the way that these work is instead of actually writing out our input tags, we have Ruby code that makes them for us. And for any type of Ruby code that you want to be able to do, usually the type of input it is will be listed first, followed by underscore tag. And sometimes we add, we'll add field if it's like a field that they're gonna type in. And so like we've got submit tag, and I probably shouldn't leave these open, but just to give you some examples, like up here we did text. So if I want text down here, it'd be text field tag. If I wanted a password field, it would be password field tag, email field tag, number field tag. There's a lot of cool things you can do. It'll pretty much follow that function. If you're ever not sure, just search for it. You can always do Rails form helpers text field or something like that, and you'll get a lot of good results. And so we'll go ahead and we'll make this the same way. So we'll say create shoe, so we don't cause any syntax errors. Let's close these. And here we're just going to add the attribute that we want our text field tag, what we want in our what we want to display in our name slot. So up here we wanted it to display shoes brand. We want it to display the exact same thing down here. We just have to do this syntax where we actually make it a symbol because it's expecting a symbol as an argument. I also want to emphasize, I think I showed someone this, you will see these written in more like in multiple ways, and it is because Ruby has this built-in thing where if there's a space, it then is assuming parentheses for your argument. And so you can write it either way. Don't let that trip you up. This can also be written either way because these are just arguments being sent to a method. There just happens to be conventions about how we write it. And so I tend to write it this way personally. Let's see what we get with that. No. Oh, this is why I don't like bybug, because it kills everything. So it might have shown up with just the form. I was expecting it to, so it would have been weird if it did not. And while we're at it, let's add a label. I'm gonna do this the old school way because I don't actually.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So for the form tag, I can see that it knows it's going to shoes path, but how does it know whether it's sending a get request or a post request or like a patch request?
Really good question. So by default, your form is going to send a post request. But I have a syntax error because that's why this is not loading. But that's good to know, Chris. Where's my syntax error? Unexpected end. Am I missing an end somewhere in here? It is the label tag. But that one is closed. Why can I not see my syntax error? All of my little guys are closed. This end goes with the form tag. Oh, I'm missing my do. That's my problem. I had an extra, that's my bad. Sorry guys, I don't write a lot of form tags. I write a lot of form fors. We needed to tell it what it was. You can't have an end without a do. That makes sense. And going back to, what were you asking a second ago? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you said, so I was asking about how it knows whether to send a post or a get request. And you said it sends a post request by default, but what if you wanted to like tell it to send a get request or a patch request? How would you do that?
I've done this before, and let's see if I can guess the syntax. If not, we'll look it up. I think you can specify something. It's something along the lines of you send in a second argument of method. It didn't error, so I think that was right. Okay. Yeah, so basically your first argument will always be the URL. The second argument is optional. So if you remember back to Ruby when we would set up optional arguments, the default will be post. But you can always send in a second argument of method get. Or method patch. Yeah, so you could change that to method patch if you wanted it to be. But for right now, we'll just leave it as a method get. To be honest, a form tag is what gets used quite often for a search. That's how you see it most often used. And the reason is because we don't really deal with objects with a form tag. A form tag is much better when we just care about the URL. And a form tag works really well for sending a GET request where you're remembering the params that you sent. Because when we send it as a GET request, what it does is it just gives us a really weird URL. Actually, what I'm gonna do is show you what it looks like. So let's say I did type in Puma and click create shoe. It will not go to our create action. It's gonna go to our index, and then it gives us this stuff. So it sends in all the params after the question mark, which can be really helpful if you wanted this to be a search request and you wanted to be able to share this link so that someone saw the same thing as you. So just as a back pocket, know that form tags a lot of times get used for search requests. But so other than that, now these should be exactly the same. And so both of our forms are, let's take a look at them. Let's bring this out a little bit bigger. So we can see here, both of our form actions are the same. We get a little bit of added stuff from the form tag to say what type of characters we're accepting. But our inputs should look the same. We also get an added ID. But other than that, our stuff is basically happening the same. And our submit ends up having a name value as well. So for the most part, we've created 2 identical forms. So we're going to do it one last way. And this last way is my favorite. Well, actually, I'm going to do it 2 ways. Shoot. We're going to do it 2 ways, but the last 2 ways are very, very, very similar. So the last 2 ways that we're going to do it is we're going to first do it with a form 4. Have any of you guys, maybe like a hand raise or put it in the chat, have any of you guys done form 4 yet? Okay, we got a few people. But I think a lot of you guys won't be there yet because it's really like next week's, kind of bleeds into next week's curriculum. And so this is the way that Mike just shared that we could also get brand. I'm curious, actually, I think we can delete that and it will still give us brand. It doesn't give us the colon, but besides that, it would give us the same thing. Cool, thank you for sharing that, Mike. So we have a few of you guys. What form 4 does is this one I said is really good for searches. Form 4 works so nicely with objects and it makes our life just a little bit easier. So when I write form 4, last time we were trying to accept a URL. And actually, maybe I'll just write it like that so it's more obvious. This time we're trying to accept an object. And so we would actually want to accept like a brand new shoes object. And so for now, we're going to change this. I'm going to put shoe.new just to make it really obvious what's happening here. And we're going to set up form fields that know about our new shoe. And because they know about our new shoe, they're going to be a lot smarter in making their stuff, and we don't have to include quite as much information. So just to give you an example of that, my submit tag, all I have to do is write submit f.submit. I'm going to mix up all my syntax here. f.submit, and this is saying our submit tag is going to be built off of this object, and Rails has a lot of logic to look at that object and say, is this a new object? Is this an already created object? What should I do with this object? And it will look at it and realize that it is a new object because it doesn't have an ID, and it will automatically say create shoe for us, which is so nice. I didn't even tell it that. I just said f.submit. So it's very, very smart, or the people who coded it are very smart and made it have all of this cool functionality. And then similarly, when we do our other tags, we can do like an f.label. And the big difference between these is every one of these examples you see will work for a form 4, and we just ditch the tag. So we'll ditch the tag in all of these. So we'll say f.label, and we'll call it brand. And then we'll say f.text field, and we'll say brand. This already, I don't know, like to me just looks so much cleaner and more concise if we compare it to here, because I didn't have to actually write out my shoes brand as nested. I didn't have to write out what I wanted for my submit tag. Didn't even have to write out the URL. I honestly dealt only in Ruby code. Yes, Mike, that was the point I was getting to. This is pure Ruby here. That's all it is. And so that's what they were kind of trying to get to, is like, can we deal with all Ruby instead? And it does look identical. If we come down, this will be our third form. We get a few extra pieces. Our form has a class and our form has an ID, but the action is still shoes and the method is still post. And the reason for that is because form 4 is very smart and said, you gave me a new shoe. Well, I'm gonna look up what is the route that I'm supposed to send, like what is the create route for new shoes, and then it fills in all of that info for you. We still get our authenticity token. Our label looks the same as our one before. And then look, our input very nicely and neatly typed out our params exactly how we wanted to see them with shoe bracket brand. I don't know if you can tell, but I really love that they have these helpers because I think it just makes your life so much easier. We went from writing all of this code to this really short form, and it just saves a lot of time. And the other way it saves a lot of time is, I want you to see how this changes if I pass in a shoe that we already have in the database. So let me find, I'm pretty sure I have shoe, I think I have it, I think I have a shoe 4. I don't think I've deleted anything, so we'll just try shoe 4. And so now I've just changed this to be a form for shoe 4, and look at what it did for me. That magic. It changed this to update shoe. It also changed it to have a different path, and it had us a path that's shoes/4 because it knows that that would be where we would submit our update. It also sends in and turns it into a patch because it knows it's something that is already in existence. And then it also changes our submit to say, oh, this is something in the database. We want to update it instead of creating it. So it's very cool. One bad practice of doing this is from our views, we don't ever want to access our database. So if we go back to the way, we're still kind of in our new ones, and we want this to be a shoe.new, where would be a better place to put this code that I have highlighted right now? Ah, the controller, yes. So we can pass it through in the controller, and the way your code will look is a little bit like we just set it as an instance variable. And I think of this as your blank slate that you're then going to be making a form for. So it's kind of like, we want to make a form that fits this. And one thing just to point out that it happens when a form 4 is used is very specifically the form 4 is checking to make sure that this is an attribute of shoe. And to give you an example of that, my form tag doesn't do that, so I could call this like rando, something that doesn't exist, and we will end up having no issues. It will make another field. If I do that down here, and I call this rando, we will get an error message because it knows that rando is not an attribute of my shoe. And then it gives me, it tries to figure out what I meant, and it's like rando's close to brand, maybe she meant that. But so you'll actually have to match these with your object's attributes. So it kind of does like a little bit of a check to make sure all of your stuff is in line and you're not calling one thing in your form that you've called in your table something else, which I think is a cool little check. Now, okay, don't worry guys, I see the time and we're gonna make sure we get through everything. The last piece, and the last one that I wanna show you is this thing called form with. If you look up any documentation, you will see form with much more frequently than you see any other documentation because they've switched all of it to form with because it's the new and updated accepted use. It is still very important to know form tag and form 4 because many people wrote their code before form with came out. And most people that get hired as developers work on code bases that haven't been updated with the new conventions. So new things take a while to actually get implemented in code. And it's probably more likely you'll see these two, but in the future, it's going to be going towards form with. So it is important to know all three. The good news is form with is very similar to form 4 and basically incorporates both of these into one thing. So before, we kind of used form tag. I know this isn't going to give me a comment, but we used form tag for like searches, forms not related to a model mainly. And then we would use form 4 for any creating or updating of models. That's kind of like the difference. This is not for a model, this is for a model. Form with, you can use form with a model or with a URL. And I should say, this is really searches. This is where the URL matters more than the object. And this is where the object matters more than the URL, I guess. It's maybe the way to think of it. So the way form with works, very, very similar to form 4. The big difference is in our argument, we're going to pass in to say that we want to deal with a model. If we wanted this to be like a form tag, instead we would pass in that we want this to be a URL. So we would say like shoes. Because we're dealing with a model and we are actually creating a model, we want to deal with a model. We would only do this if we were doing like a search form. So most of the time you will be doing this with a model. And we will fill it out like we did before. Whether or not it has a URL, it will include this do F. So it's just like we basically have 2 options. And you'll also see this sometimes written without the parentheses. Remember, it's the same thing. Just like to emphasize that. And we'll add an end, and actually, we should be able to copy over all of that code and it still should work. So let's take a look. And now we've got our last one, our form with. It doesn't have a class. You can specify a class if you want it to. I'm like a bare bones kind of person and I like it just to have the basics, but we could have said, I think it looks like this, new shoe or something like that. We could give it a class. Yeah, so we're on the last one. So now it has a class, but it doesn't need a class. It has all of the other pieces, our action, our post. It works the same way as our other one, whereas if this was a shoe that was already created, it would have changed this to say update shoe, and it would have changed it to fill in the value, which is really cool. So basically the same as form 4, the syntax right here is just a little bit different. Yes, and Mike, that's a really good point. All of these examples that I've shown you down here, they add your authenticity token by default. Any major questions about those?
Quick question.
Yes.
I wanted to know about the form with. I wanted to see another value of it. Can it take in multiple models, right? So take in the idea that we have a form for a pirate, and a pirate has many ships. So we have 2 different models. Can it take in an array of models as an argument?
No, but neither can form 4, but it can take in a nested model. So if you were editing a ship that belonged to a pirate and you wanted to specify, basically if your URL was pirate/1/ship/new, you could get that nesting in there. And it would look like an array, but you're not passing through an array. It's really like first top thing, second thing. So it's not really like an array of arguments. So you will see that syntax out there. And then the other option is we will get to nested forms, but I'm going to put that on hold because I feel like I've already like dropped a lot of stuff here, and we will cover nested forms next week in depth. But good question.
Yeah, I actually have a question because we've covered like new. So I get that if you pass in a new shoe, it will say like these fields are for assigning attributes to the new shoe. But then if you pass in a shoe that already exists, it's like, oh, these fields are for like editing the shoe that already exists. I guess it wouldn't be with a form, but is there sort of like a delete version of this where you pass in a shoe that already exists? And then I guess you would just have a submit button that was just like delete this shoe.
Yeah, so not really, not like a default submit, I would say, because like, I mean, we would have to tell it that that's what we want it. Like we would just send in that we want it to be a delete path, but you could still use it. We would just have to tell it that that's what we were doing.
Right, so you could do like the you could do like the form, which one was it? The form tag, and then just pass in the URL and say like method delete or something.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
exactly. So for now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use form with because it's actually a combine of these two. And so we're gonna delete this. And for the sake of time, we're gonna move on to making sure we can update and edit. And I'm just gonna really quickly add in another field here. So we'll say condition. Also, if you're curious how I just did that, I'll tell you on this next one. So I highlight this and then I hit on a Mac Command D. I think it's Control D on a PC, but I'm not positive about that. And we'll put color. And we'll do one more. Because once you've done one field, you've done them all, is how I feel. And we'll change this to a number field, and then we'll change these to price. So now we should have a full form set up, and this will look a little bit more correct. Awesome. So we've got a thing. We can make a full new shoe. When we do make a full new shoe, we always want to send them somewhere after we create. I'm a big fan of a redirect because we want our URL to change to match what they're going to see. So we will redirect them to the shoe path for this shoe, which can be written both like this, and actually you can write it just as shoe. It's very, very, very smart. I like to be explicit, so we'll leave it as that. So let's see if we can create one. Let's do, Nike's just easy. We'll say old. They'll be brown like mud. And right now their price is $15 because this will be a resale app. That's how we'll use it. We're like posting old sneakers to sell. And I thought I hit create shoe and now nothing is happening. Why is nothing happening? I have a create action in my shoes controller. We're right here. Param is missing, the value is empty. Shoes. Does this not, it is listing it as shoes. Ah, this one is shoe. Maybe the rest of mine were saying shoe too. And I, in my first one, when I typed it out, did shoes. I think that's what was happening. My bad, guys. So this actually should always be singular. Those things matter so much, and it's so easy to forget which ones are singular and which ones are not singular. But it does create a new shoe, which was great. We don't need to save that. Now our next step is we want to make sure we can edit it. And I know I didn't leave us a lot of time for this, but in editing, it's actually, as long as our form's not super complex or a nested form, our editing is going to be pretty simple because it's almost going to be the exact same form. So we'll say edit and we'll add update here. And we will also, like last time, need to add a view, edit.html.erb. And here we're going to say, I don't want those to be capitalized, edit your shoe. And now we should at least be able to get to an edit page. Wonderful. A few pieces that are going to be a little bit different and a little bit extra in this one is when we add these, we're going to need a different instance than shoe.new. So like for bare bones start, I can actually really copy and paste this entire thing over to our edit. I'm going to get rid of the class because we don't want to call it new shoe. But we can pretty much copy this whole thing. Right now, can anyone predict where is it going to break? Sorry. Yeah, so it's going to break, and if, oh, it didn't break. That is shocking to me. I guess it just feels like it's a nil value then. Form 4 will break with that, which is interesting. I guess form with won't. Because form 4 needs an object to be made, and this one I suppose is flexible enough that if it doesn't get an object, it does something else. But this isn't how we want it to say. We would like it to have our stuff filled in. and it's only going to have our stuff filled in if we pass in a shoe. So we need our shoe this time to be found in the params. And I'm going to add these to both of those actions. This is where you start to see it. You're like, I see it 3 times. Maybe this should be a helper method. It should, but we're going to handle that a different day. Perfect. And now our form was really smart and ended up giving us all of that info. And it should also now have a patch here. And it does still do it like we did in Sinatra. It includes it as a hidden value with a method, like with an override method for our patch. In our update, this code is gonna be pretty similar to what we're used to. And so we can do it just like we have in Sinatra. We will update with the params. The big difference, and someone wisely asked this question, I think Anna, do we have to do this crazy params thing here? We do. And so we would put this, and I did not spell update right. And this would actually check to make sure that these are the accepted params. We could, if we wanted to, we could say, no, you already set the price, you can't change it. And we could take it off at the table and not allow it to be permitted in the update, but we could allow it to be updated in the create. So there's like a little bit of flexibility there if you wanted those to be different. Like if this was a seller market, you might say, no, they can't change the price. They already said it. That'd be up to you. And then we would redirect them. Yes, so that's a really good thing. Nefelber just added something to the chat. And just so everyone can see it, if they watch the recording, I'm gonna add this here. You could also say, you know what, I'm good with you putting in like any params as long as they're not these 2 things. And so you can also do an except. It does open up like the gamut quite a bit, but so I would say it's a little bit safer to go the opposite way, but it is good to know that this is an option. So thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna delete that though. And then we will redirect again back to our shoe path. Just to show you guys, we'll do this one as at shoe. So let's see if this works. Let's change this to, we cleaned them up a little bit. We'll just call them used now and see if we can, perfect. So the bulk of what I really wanted to show you guys was that once you get your new form working, you just really copy and paste it and use the exact same thing for your edit form. The trickier part is making sure your controller is set up correctly, because your edit and your new will only work correctly if you are passing in the object you want to work with. For edit, we want to work with something that has already been created, so we find it by the params. For new, we want to work with an object that hasn't yet been created, so we send in this blank copy. One thing that does confuse a few people, and I just want to emphasize it, is I've had people think that this shoe that gets passed to the form is the same, like we still have access to it in create, or somehow the object is getting passed around. The object doesn't get passed around. We basically create this new shoe and then throw it away. Like it's just used as a template. This isn't the one that actually gets saved to the database. And I just like to emphasize that because I think sometimes there's a little bit of confusion with that. This is just a blank copy for us to build off of. So I did promise that we were going to do CRUD, and looking at the time, we do not have a ton of time for delete. But let's just try to tackle it. So we'll add in a delete method, and I always lose my mind on this method. I get so confused about if this one's the destroy one and delete is the get method, the HTTP verb, right? Yes. Hopefully I'm not crazy about that. So now we have destroy. By this point, we could just say resources because we are going to use all 7. But you know, neither here nor there. So this will create for us a new route. I just want to make sure that it's there. Rails info routes. That will send a delete request. Oh, wow, that's kind of hard to see, isn't it? It will send a delete. There we go. A delete request to shoes/ID, and it will send it to the destroy method. Perfect. That looks good. If you're like me and get confused about which one is delete and which one's destroy, you can always just do resources and check the routes to see. But so in here, what we'll be sending in, this is the path that's basically going to be shoes/ID. So the first thing we'll need to do is make sure we find that shoe that they want to delete. Oh, that's not good. We'll find that shoe they want to delete, and then we'll just destroy it. And then we will redirect them back to something that exists. So we'll probably want to go to the shoes path or all of the shoes. So now, how do we actually add in this link? There are technically two ways to do this. So let's go to let's add it to our show page. I'm going to show you the quick way first, and then, well, I'll just show you you could do it as a form, and you could change the method to delete. You can also do it as a link because Rails has some extra pieces built in where we can override our link to not be a GET request. So I can do a link to the path that I want. And if we were just looking at the routes, and the path that we're going to go to is just our shoe path. Remember, because the path was just shoes/ID, but we're trying to delete shoes/ID. So we can link to the shoe path of this shoe. And then we can, and we want this to say text first. Let me make it as an argument. Delete. So here's our link to, and then we can actually send in an extra argument that is going to say method delete. Let's see if this did it. I'm a little questioning if I have done that correctly. I try to speed through things. It's not always good. And let's inspect the page to see what that gave us. It did give us the right stuff. So you see this data method delete and relative no follow. It's a little bit of JavaScript magic that's happening that's built in, or jQuery magic, I guess you would say, that is transforming this normally GET request to a delete request because of this data method and relative no follow. So when I click on this, even though it's a link, instead of sending a GET request, we've overridden it by specifying the method in our link, and it is then going to delete it. And I don't know, did you guys watch what happened there over here? A form appeared magically for like a second. I'm going to show you because it was really cool. I think it's cool. I know it's time. We'll delete. So just watch your eyes over here when I click delete. Did you see that form that appeared? So it basically used JavaScript to build the form for you to then delete the shoe. I wasn't watching. Did we actually destroy the shoe? Let's do the Puma. Okay, good. It's gone. These blank copies that I made, we should probably also delete. Okay, good. So it's working. Cool. I talked a lot today, and I apologize. There was a ton to get through. And we don't have time for questions, which is really sad, but we have office hours all day tomorrow. So if any of this was overwhelming or too much, not all day tomorrow, we have office hours at this time tomorrow. Please come to office hours with all your questions or ask them in Slack. This code will be pushed and this video will be uploaded for your guys' use later. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jen.